Thank you so much for joining us today. Yes, I'm Monique Hurley and I'm a lawyer at the Human Rights Law Centre, coming to you from unceded Wathaurong country down in Geelong. And today we're in conversation with Nerita Waight, the CEO of the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, otherwise known as VALS. Welcome, Nerita.
Thank you very much.
So VALS are a key partner organisation that the Human Rights Law Centre often works in solidarity with on strategic litigation and law reform projects around Victoria. VALS was established as a community-controlled cooperative in 1973 and provides legal advice and assistance to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the state of Victoria. So, Nerita, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that VALS does, particularly on advocating for systemic law reform?
Not a problem. So I'm a Yorta Yorta and Ngarrindjeri woman and obviously CEO of VALS. I'm also a mum of two boys, Mateo, who'll be 5 in November, and Iluka, who's just gone 1. I'm very lucky to work at VALS. As you stated, we are an Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisation, or ACCO for short, that is non-profit and does some amazing work for our communities. The incarceration rate of Aboriginal and Strait Islander adults in Victoria is 14 times higher than non-Indigenous people in Victoria, leaving us as the most incarcerated peoples on earth, which creates so much trauma, and that trauma has community-wide generational impacts and ultimately leads to our people dying in custody from preventable causes at a really high rate. In a 6-week period, we lost 2 Aboriginal men in prison who are only respectively in their early 30s and late 30s. So put simply, a lot of our focus is on ensuring that we get our people out of the criminal legal system and keep them out. To do that, we have a law practice to help with a range of criminal, civil and family law matters. We also have our amazing railway practice that manages police misconduct cases and criminal inquests into deaths in custody. We have Balitnalu, which provides support to Aboriginal children who come in contact with the criminal legal system. And we also have our amazing community justice program support team that works to make our services culturally safe and holistic. In that team, we've got our client service officers who are Aboriginal people who can help clients to understand the legal system, help them tell their story, and connect them with our wraparound support services. We have our critical custody notification service where police have to notify us when an Aboriginal person is taken into custody. And then our team makes regular welfare checks to ensure that person knows their rights and has access to things they need, like medication and healthcare. That team makes about 12,000 calls a year providing that service, which is not a little number for sure. And on average, we see 32 Aboriginal people arrested per day. The Community Justice Programs team also provides support through family violence support services, community education, and our Baggara Transitional Housing Service for Aboriginal and Strait Islander women coming out of prison. So it's a decent amount of work that we cover, and we do it on a shoestring budget, and we mostly rely on the federal and Victorian governments for our funding. But unfortunately, like many services, we just don't receive the funding we need to meet all the demand for our services and from our communities. I've been working overtime alongside our board to ensure that we get to a stage where we have the resources to help every Aboriginal and Strait Islander person in Victoria that wants to use our services.
No, that's a lot. And yeah, thank you so much for taking time to chat with us today. It's really nice to see you on the screen. The last time that I saw you in person was when we were both part of a coalition of organisations that were handing over a petition signed by over 65,700 Victorians calling on the Andrews government to raise the minimum age of criminal responsibility from 10 to at least 14 years old. Just keen to get your thoughts on why you think raising the age is important and what you think the block is for the Victorian government committing to that straightforward reform.
As a human being, it is horrific to have to say that in 2022, we still put 10-year-olds in prison. And even before a child under the age of 14 gets to the point where they put in youth prison because the age of criminal responsibility is 10 years old, and any child from 10 can be detained by a police officer and put in a police cell. That's before they're convicted of anything. And they also might not actually be convicted of anything at all. Imagine a 10-year-old spending a few hours or even a weekend in a prison cell. Imagine being an Aboriginal child and being put in a police cell where you have a history of knowing that your loved ones and your community members have died in those circumstances. That's a traumatic experience in of itself, one that can derail their schooling and sets one apart to being trapped in the criminal legal system in their whole life. And it's a traumatic experience for that child's parents and anybody who loves them, their siblings and their cousins and their aunts and uncles. Subjecting a child to an experience like that can destabilize the whole community and just leads to a ripple effect of negative outcomes. The same goes for having to attend a busy courthouse. That's a difficult experience for an adult to process. And I used to be a lawyer. It's traumatic for a child. And we subject children to this trauma even before the medical evidence is clear that children don't have the brain development to be criminally responsible. Certainly any child under 14 years old does not have the mental capacity to be held criminally responsible. And VALS's position is that strong medical evidence that children older than 14 years old still actually don't have that capacity. Almost all the children that get caught up in the criminal legal system have been failed by society many, many times. Most of them have contact with the child protection system by the time they're 3. Most end up in residential and out-of-home care before they have contact with the criminal legal system. Many of them have trouble at school, and a disproportionate amount have been expelled from school at some point. Most of these children, if not one, have 2 cognitive impairments and haven't received adequate healthcare for those issues. There's just so many points in the early life of a child where, they have issues, and we just don't, as a society, we do not give them the support they need. We fail them, not once or twice, but over and over again. And we punish them for that failure of ours by putting them in a cell, by putting them in a prison. And when I look at the kids that we service who are experiencing the criminal justice system, a lot of the time, Monique, it's for some very minor charges, minor property damage or minor theft. And it's just heartbreaking to know that we just do this, and we do it with such ease. And when organizations like mine, like yours, and many other like-minded entities raise these issues, all the time we're shot down with references to community safety, or that this is just the way it's done. But it's not always done that way. There are dozens of countries that have an age of criminal responsibilities at 14 years old or higher, and they address the behavior of these children for what is a health issue or a schooling issue or a secure housing issue. Maybe that family needs some resources to provide a better environment for a child. And we're capable of exercising that kind of humanity as well. We can do that here. The support services that these children exist, it's just we don't give them the resources they need. In the last Victorian budget, the government predicted they'll spend $260 million for the year, keeping 210 children in youth prisons each night. That's more than $1 million to keep a child in prison for a year.
It's wild, yeah.
It is. And we would just go so far if we stopped spending that money on youth prisons and spent it on connecting those children to well-resourced supported services. For you and me, it's simple and obvious. But governments just won't do it because they're obsessed with being tough on crime, and emulating that punitive law and order approach as being a show of strength and responsibility. But for me, that attitude is because they have an obsession that is linked to brutal colonization. That obsession has a long history in Victoria. I'm not sure if you know, Monique, but this state was the last to execute a person using capital punishment laws. And at the time, the Premier made a big deal about ensuring that execution happened because he thought it would be a vote winner. I mean, can you imagine?
Yes, it's really it's really hard to comprehend how, yeah, barbaric we can treat people.
It is. And, our Victorian politicians make that same judgment, those same judgments today. They believe that Victorians want people to be punished in really harsh and public manner. And some media outlets, not naming, but some, work hard to sell newspapers under that same assumption. For me, they're all wrong. They're a sort of self-fulfilling group within Victorian politics. And I believe better of the Victorian public. I think that they don't want that colonial style criminal system anymore. They know that doesn't lead to community safety. That doesn't lead to prosperity. And if you look at it, that petition, which we were able to present, really emulates that Victorian public don't actually think that is, that had over 250,000 signatories, and Victoria had the most signatories. So it's proof that they don't think the way politicians assume they do. I just think, as a society, Victoria's moved beyond it, and politicians and media are stuck in a different world, and they need to come on board with what the agenda really is, which is ensuring progress and prosperity for everyone, but also doing community safety differently. It's not about prisons, it's not about police. It's about ensuring that children and families are provided services at that early point when they needed them, because that's how you make society safe after all.
Yes, and those points that you raised are consistent with, a lot of emerging international work that's being done, and work that's being done here in Victoria too, through that Victorian inquiry into the criminal justice system, which found that the legal system's in need of overhaul because of the current kind of commitment to punitive, tough on crime measures not working, and not actually working to undermine community safety rather than upholding it, which is what the government likes to, the line that they like to parrot. And so now that we're on the government, the state election in Victoria is just around the corner, scheduled for late November this year. If there were a top 3 other things you could put at the top of the to-do list for whatever government is formed at that time, can you please tell us what they would be?
Oh, Monique, 3 is hard, but I suppose I'll try and narrow it down. First and foremost for me is bail. The next Victorian government needs to fix Victoria's broken bail laws immediately. It's really non-negotiable, because every day that goes by, more lives are being ruined. This year, we've had the coronial inquest into the passing of Veronica Nelson while she was in Dame Phyllis Frost Centre prison. And Veronica was there because of the current bail laws that the government introduced in 2017-18. She was denied bail for shoplifting and related offences. We're waiting on coronial findings, but Aboriginal women are having their lives ruined by these laws each and every day. About 2 in 3 Aboriginal women in Victoria's prisons are there on remand. So that means they've not been convicted of anything, and they are charged with minor offences that won't likely bring a prison sentence if they are convicted. Most of them are victim survivors of domestic violence that haven't been given the support they need, and many of them are primary carers, and being denied bail means they could lose access to their children, and that the family members that rely on them are left without support, which has a ripple effect through that person's family and community. The majority of Aboriginal children in Victoria's prisons are similarly on remand for minor offending. Illogically, they face the same bail test as adults. It's an incredibly harsh system. Politicians said it would be keep the community safe, but really, all they do is destroy communities. And a huge amount of money has been drained out of communities to build the extra prison capacity needed because of the bail laws. Billions upon billions of dollars that could have gone to support services, and the people that need it have instead been spent building more and bigger prisons that will continue to need billions of dollars to run and maintain if we keep filling them up. I think Victorians prefer that money to be invested in communities, not wasted on prisons. My second wish list item is, of course, OPCAT. So we want to see the Victorian government prioritise the implementation of independent detention oversight. An IBAC report in 2021 found that there had been an increase in corruption and abuse in Victoria's prisons, and that was billions of dollars the government had spent on prisons. At that same time, the Victorian government was supposed to have implemented the UN's OPCAT treaty, which required them to implement independent detention oversight. That would essentially be independent public body or bodies with the power to inspect places of detention without giving notice and to compile a report on what they see and what improvements can be made. And those reports could be made public if the body thought it necessary. This independent oversight would be proactive, so not sitting on their hands. And that's what we often see with IBAC and the Ombudsman. Although they can investigate incidents in prison or police custody, it needs to be done after a complaint has been made. The Independent Detention Oversight Body would go carry out proactive inspections so as to address issues before they lead to abuse or torture. The Victorian government failed to meet that deadline to implement independent detention oversight. They say they need money from the federal government, but that's a bit of a poor excuse. And I think harks back to the reasons that we talked about in relation to raise the age. They continue to spend billions of prisons, but they don't have a few million to ensure people are being tortured in those prisons. They fund 2,100 new police officers without any business case or without any demonstrated benefit to community safety, but no dollars for independent inspection. I mean, I don't buy it. We do hope, though, that it's taken more seriously after the election, and it's important that independent detention oversight is culturally appropriate for my communities. IBAC has released a report recently that says that our people are less likely to make a complaint about police because they don't trust the complaint will be handled properly or fairly. And that's the same across the criminal legal system. When you talk to our communities, they don't trust the systems because they've never been treated fairly by them. They lose loved ones to the system. And the independent detention oversight needs to be designed in consultation with our people so that it has culturally appropriate services that our people can trust. My third, I'm going to claim raising the age as a bonus one, since we've already talked about it. But other than raise the age, I would also like to see police accountability.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's no secret, Monique, as you know, that our people, like many marginalised communities, are over-policed. They're often subjected to mistreatment by police. When our people are victims of crimes, they're less likely to get proper support from police and instead seen as the perpetrator. Victoria Police is an institution built on racism and rife with systemic racism. And that culture persists in part because there's no proper accountability of Victoria Police. And in almost every instance, it's police who investigate police. The Lawyer X scandal, where police used a lawyer to inform on their own clients, set off so many red flags and should have been the catalyst for a really aggressive reform of Victoria Police, but it didn't happen. Instead, what we're seeing is a really narrow and slow reform process from the government. So the next government, whoever they might be, needs to prioritise a much more ambitious reform of police oversight. We want that body, that independent body, established because it can have adequate powers and resources to carry out independent investigations of police. It can provide culturally appropriate services for Aboriginal people. They can have a strategy for investigating and addressing systemic racism in Victoria Police. For those who are interested, we have published a policy paper with much more detail on police accountability. But just briefly, we think that a body like the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland is an example that Victoria could rework to suit our context. And if anybody listening is interested in that topic more, I really do urge them to visit our website at www.vals.org.au to see our policy papers on police oversight, bail and OPCAT, and raise the age as well.
All of the things.
And
so just to recap, we've got raising the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to at least 14 years old, fixing dangerous and discriminatory bail laws, ensuring that there's appropriate implementation of OPCAT, the UN's anti-torture treaty, and whoever is elected in November will have to get their skates on ahead of the January 2023 deadline for implementation on that front. And then 4 was end the practice of police investigating police and create proper and robust independent oversight of police in Victoria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one, I mean, that for me, when we talk about independent police oversight, that also has to then extend to the coronial process.
Mhm.
We can't see Victoria Police investigating an Aboriginal person, a death of an Aboriginal person in custody, where they are part of that process. It's traumatic for families. It naturally, there are questions of fairness and bias when you're having the body who led to the situation investigating itself.
Yes, I think, yeah, there can be no justice so long as police are investigating the actions of their colleagues in relation to deaths in their custody. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's an absolute privilege to have had this conversation and to be able to work with you and the team at VALS on a day-to-day basis. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Monique, for having us on and just having a chat about what we sort of think in relation to raise the age and some of our priorities for the election, but also for the amazing work that the Human Rights Law Centre do in supporting the work and amplifying the voice of VALS, as well as other organisations that you work with.
Thank you very much, Nerita.
Not a problem.